Good evening, and welcome to Missouri on the Fly podcast with tonight's guest, Duane Doty. Before we get started, I would like to thank our sponsors of our show, Cardiac Mountain Outfitters, Woolly Bugger Fly Company, LOZ Lures, Dooley's Fly Fishing, Lazy River Road Outfitters, Grumpy Platypus Hackle, and Andronimus Fly Company. And please remember, on September 10th, we have Free Veterans Fishing Day at Montauk State Park. We have a lot of great events for vets going on down that day. We're going to teach them how to fish, teach them how to tie flies, provide them with the supplies they need. We have some great drawings, some good food, and some great support if they need it. Duane, how's it going, man?
Pretty good here.
We've been needing to make this happen for a while. I'm glad we finally have.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I follow you on Facebook, and I always hear about the Dark Army, and sometimes you're fly fishing, sometimes you're jerkbait fishing, but I constantly see people catching personal best fish on Taneycomo out of your boat.
Well, it happens a lot. It does happen a lot in my boat. That's kind of what I like to take pride in doing is trying to get people on their personal best trout out of Lake Taneycomo. And it's been a long time coming. Been a lot of work getting there, and it's been through different various avenues and cycles and trial and error to get to where I'm at.
You know, you and I both had a conversation here actually before the show started about streamers and kind of my obsession with streamers and how your jerk baits kind of were born through streamers and years of experience. It's amazing, the path,
Yeah,
because now
yeah,
it's really come full circle between you both, or you and I both.
right. Yeah. So yeah, I started off strictly a fly fisherman on Lake Taneycomo. That's all I ever wanted to do was fly fish. That's all I ever wanted to guide was fly fishing. And started playing around with streamers 15 years, 16 years ago when Kelly Gallup first came out with that TNA rainbow pattern. Played with that on
Mhm.
Lake Taneycomo, messed around with some big fish, and kind of evolved from there, growing the business, trying to expand the business to not just keying in on fly fishermen, but to drawing in a bigger crowd and finding ways that not so experienced fishing people could get into big fish. And it turned into the jerk baits. And, as with you, you started with jerk baits, introduction to jerk baits, and then realized that, hey, that could be possibility with streamers. And actually, the jerk baits were born from and evolved from streamer fishing, colors, patterns, types of retrieves, fishing during the day, during the night. And it's all information that I learned over the years and turned into the jerk baits.
It's funny. Everybody's. I know it went through a crazy period there on Taneycomo with people talking about treble hooks and this and that, and a lot of uneducated people making statements about what this hook or that hook does to this fish's mouth,
Right,
and then you're seeing them on Facebook taking pictures holding a fish, squeezing it so hard its eyeballs are popping out that they're going to release back in the lake.
right. A lot of people base what they say off of emotion rather than education. And um, of course, it's easy to put into the Google machine and actually research yourself the numbers of studies that have been done since the 1970s of treble hook versus single point hook. There's equivalent damage by both. None is greater than the other, which
Mm-hmm.
which kind of puts that even playing field. But where you come into loss of fish is fish handling, and that's where the real education needs to come from. fish handling especially during certain times of year when the DO levels are low, temperatures are hot, and we're starting to come into that season now where our DO levels are starting to tank a little bit, and that'll happen all the way till about Thanksgiving Day when Table Rock Lake turns over again. Um, how you fight a fish, if you're fighting it on 2 pound test versus 6 or 8 pound test, building up lactic acid, things like that are all things that have to take into account. The conservation department, over their studies over time, has determined that 9 out of 10 fish will swim away, and that's taken into consideration sometimes some mishandling. Hopefully, there's not a lot of that, but overall, your average is 9 out of 10 fish swim away. Even if you think you're handling it right, still only 9 out of 10 swim away. And so the only way to increase that number, I like to think that, of course, my numbers are lower than that. I'd like to think 99 out of 100 swim away.
Mm-hmm.
But that all comes down to how you handle your fish and how you fight them in. Um, a lot of people are really interested in fishing with a 3-weight fly rod and catching a 8-10 pound fish on a 3-weight fly rod with 7X tippet. Well, you got to think that under certain times of the year, that's possible, when our DO levels are high and things like that. But in August, September, October, that may not be a good idea. The only way to really look at improving our fishery at Lake Taneycomo, which, by the way, has never been better. Our quality of fish is just absolutely incredible. It's not uncommon to pull up 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28-inch rainbows right now. Our brown population took a little bit of a hit about 2 springs ago. During a high water event, we didn't have a lot of shad come through the system. It didn't draw the browns up out of the lake. And we had a type of brown that tends to migrate or move around quite a bit more. So they just followed that wave of water when it was going over Power Sight Dam down in Bull Shoals. So, we still got browns out there, and we still got good browns out there, but not like the populations we had back in 2006, 2007 was probably the last really good brown run we had in October. Of course, in 2008, we had another high water event during the summer where they dumped 80, 85-degree water out of Table Rock Lake into Taneycomo, and that killed a bunch of browns. And they stocked the triploids, and 7, 8, 9 years later, you saw the effects of that with a new 40-pound brown trout state record, a 36-pound brown trout caught by Paul Cruz. And fortunately, the conservation department is still stocking the 10, 15,000 browns a year, but they're stocking 5,000 of those to 7,000 of those will be those triploids again. And we're already starting to see those introduced into the system. Some people are catching some of them. They've got the clipped adipose fin, which is the only fin that doesn't grow back, that determines that is an actual triploid. And a triploid is a sterile brown trout. It doesn't have the 2 chromosomes. It's got 3 of them. That's why it's a triploid. So it's not really a female or a male. It doesn't run up to spawn. It spends those 2 months of its life every year feeding and growing rather than expending energy trying to spawn. So that 40-pounder that was caught by Bill Babler was determined to be about 9 years old. So it's putting on 4 or 5 pounds a year. So in another 6, 7 years, we could start seeing fish like that again, which is just super exciting.
That's crazy. I regularly fish the current, and there's a lot of substantial browns in the current, and I'm sure there's a brown in there that goes double digits somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. One of the first state records for brown trout came out of the Current River, 99, 98, somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it broke the double-digit range. So there definitely are big browns in there. They have a natural spawning ability in the Current River, unlike Taneycomo with less than 1% natural reproduction. That's why they do so much stock in Taneycomo. But the Current has a naturally reproducing population also. And so, yeah, super exciting things could happen at the Current River.
I talked to the guys with MDC that kind of control the current there, and everything that they've been telling me is super encouraging as far as reproduction and the environment. The only thing that kills me about down there is there's so many people that go floating that just do not care about the environment.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have to share the water with everybody. You
Yeah.
know, at on Lake Taneycomo too. They've got the two kayak services running out of there, and it's just going to take some time before everybody kind of figures out where they should be, where they ought to be, and trying not to ruffle feathers. But we do have to share the water with everybody. It's just part of it.
I kind of laugh. Like today, you could go down there and it'll look like Daytona Beach from that first stop below Montauk down for 50 miles. People sitting right in the middle of the river in their chair. I'm
Yeah, well,
thinking,
they won't be out
there
there in January, and they won't be out there at night.
nope.
Got a few options there.
I keep thinking, boy, there's a 10-pound brown probably sitting right underneath your butt,
Yeah,
waiting for you to drop part of your sandwich so he can eat it.
yeah.
Um, I've had a lot of success through, we fished the 11 point earlier this year. I think that was December. Mario and I, and
Uh-huh.
uh, I think
I
you were
was,
invited. You had something going on,
yeah,
cause, and
yeah.
I, you're gonna laugh at me, but that was the first time I had Euro nymphed.
Oh
I,
yeah.
I I bought a Euro rod. I bought everything to do it, and I fished that first night with that Euro rod for I don't know, maybe an hour. And I said, I'm done with this. This is not the way I like to fish. Because for me, that explosive take of that streamer, like it's killing it when it slams it. That
Right.
that makes my day. That
It,
makes it for
it's
me.
happening too.
Yeah. So the whole fishing for that one fish down there that he's scared to death that you're fishing there and wants to run away, let somebody else catch him. I would much rather catch that fish that wants to run up and slam that streamer.
Yeah.
That's just me.
And that's the way I am. I do a lot of jerk bait fishing anymore. If I and I fish
Mm-hmm.
still, even though I'm guiding 300 days a year, people ask me, "What do you do on your days off?" Well, I'm either doing like I right now, tying flies, painting lures, or I'm out fishing myself. But if I get the chance to go out there and fish, I'm looking for that one big fish. I don't care if I don't catch any. I'm looking for that tank.
Yep, that one that wants to just flat kill anything that comes by.
Yeah.
It wasn't too long ago. I seen on your Facebook page you had a gentleman that I think it was in the 10-pound range. It was a high 20s fish that he'd caught on the fly, and
Yes.
it was now if I remember right, it wasn't Euro. You weren't Euro nymphing. You were indicator fishing,
Right. We were
and
using a Provo River rig. It's called
mm-hmm,
Provo bottom bouncing rig. It come from the Provo River, Utah areas where that uh, technique of fishing first originated from. I actually used that technique up in Alaska quite a bit when I guided up there, and was very productive with it. This last January, February, March, the fishing kind of changed on Taneycomo a little bit. We were dealing with lots of moss on the bottom, and our normal drift rigs we used fly fishing, where the weight is above the flies, was causing us within 30 seconds to get mossed up. Of course, you get mossed up, you're done fishing. So
mm-hmm.
uh, switched over to that method that I used to use up in Alaska, and what a game changer that was. So basically, it starts with a weight on the bottom and about 12 to 14 inches up from that. You have a tag end with a fly on it. I think we were fishing scuds at the time when he caught it. It was a 27-inch rainbow, I believe it was. And
Yeah, it was big.
oh yeah, it was a tank. And then above that, another 18 inches above that, you got another tag in with another fly. A lot of times they put an egg or a San Juan as a kind of an attractor fly, and then the scud is the deal sealer. And bounce that along the bottom with a slip bobber on the fly rod. That slip bobber slides on, depending on your generation and flows. I think at the time we're having 3 and 4 units running, so we're using up to 25 feet of, we'll call it leader, that slip float was sliding on, and very effective technique on Lake Taney. Even now with our lower flows and our fly rods, we're still using that, but we're using a peg float with 10 feet of leader, and then your bow rig down below that with just a little split shot, a double A or an AB split shot for a half a unit is about perfect. But still a very effective technique out there, and something that you definitely ought to Google machine, look it up. It's the first hit. If you type in pro bow rig, first hit, and they have a real nice diagram and explanation of how to fish it. But it's also very well connected to the Euro nymphing. It's very similar to what we used to use. Instead of using an anchor fly, we're just using a weight, but you still got your 2 tag ends like they typically fish that way on the U.S. fly fishing team, competition fishing. And out of a boat, you're just getting longer drifts rather than, kind of dragging through your hole in front of you, kind of leading it through. So very similar technique to the Euro nymphing. It's called a Pro Bow river rig, and very effective on Lake Taneycomo.
That's awesome. I actually have Mike. I can't think of Mike's last name at the moment, but Mike from the Team USA here from Missouri. We're gonna do a recording here pretty
Nice.
quick. We've been chatting since he got back from the competition.
Yeah. Well, I haven't been involved with any of that for several years. That gentleman that went and fished with us, I was telling you the story about with Brian Wise, Randy Hayner. He was on the fly fishing team back then. He's a head of a fly fishing shop and guide out in Colorado now. But we used to help train some of the youth for the U.S. youth fly fishing team, Euro nymphing down at Roaring River and down on the White and such. So, but it's been a while, 17, 18, I've done that.
In the spring, I went to Salbug and was speaking to Steve Daly.
Stephen Daly, yeah.
Yeah, he got me tied up with these never quit butts that they use down there on the White in the high water. It's I haven't got to use it yet, but they seem pretty interesting. Because I asked him about, and I said those would probably work up on Taneycomo. I said because the water movement's similar,
right?
And he said, well, you've got to have, these are made for deep water and specifics, but it's just another tool in the toolbox. Like
the more tools you have, the more successful you will become if you know how to use those tools properly under the right conditions. Just like this Provo river rig. It will crush fish on the White River if you take it down there and try that, especially when they have high flows going, when they got them 8 generators pumping and nobody else can really fish. You're going to get down there where the fish are.
That's awesome. Since I started this podcast, I just want people to understand that, fly fishing for years and years and years has always seemed like a rich man's game. You see people.
That's a false statement there, but
it is. But how people seen it was because a lot of doctors, lawyers, judges, preachers. I mean, growing up as a kid, the persona was it's an expensive sport like golf, because golf for years and years and years, that's just kind of the type of people that played that sport. And I try to push it on kids now, not push it, but to educate kids now and adults alike that fly fishing is just like any other fishing. You can get into fly fishing for as little or as much as you want.
Absolutely. I mean, and I forgot that back in the 1970s when I got into fly fishing when I was 10 years old. My first fly rod was a 9-foot willow stick that I cut down out of the tree and stripped the bark off of. I stole the eyelets off a Zebco rod, taped them on with duct tape, and then $2 fly reel at a garage sale, and I was fly fishing for about $6 total.
You know, my whole fly tying obsession started with like $12 from a yard sale buy from this vise and boxes upon boxes of feathers.
Yeah.
And now I would hate to say what I have
Oh
invested,
my
but
God. Yeah. Yeah. You're mad. You got to do a clean out and let some stuff go. It's like, man, that hurts.
it does, sadly. But you know, anybody can do it, and we've we, utilizing the podcast, I've been able to do fly fishing lessons here in Farmington at the Farmington Pond. They have every year they do a um, just a class. They're like, hey, you come over and help with this. I get rods donated, and you know we go out and talk to these kids and be like, hey, it's easy, it's fun. You can take a fly rod and catch bluegill, and
Absolutely.
bluegill bluegill are a freaking blast to catch on the
Oh,
fly.
that was one of my favorite things to do when I lived up in St. Charles County before I moved down here is go out to the pond and catch every night for an hour. I'd go out and catch 8, 9, 10-inch bluegill on the fly rod, and kept me sane.
Oh yeah. And now MDC's doing this the winter stocking program pretty well all over the state in these ponds.
Right.
And we've got you come to Farmington Pond, I think they call it Geising Lake. I mean when they stock them, it is shoulder to shoulder, and there are people that you know the only time they get to fly fish a year, they can't go to Taneycomo, they can't go,
Right.
or they don't have the ability to get to the current or the 11 point or anything. And by golly, those ponds, they're just crazy going to town.
And they
And
put
I
some
love,
big there too to play with. I've seen pictures of 10-pounders guys have caught out of those ponds during the winter catch and release program or winter trout program.
I think there was a 7 pounder and a 4 pounder they had put in Farmington.
Yep.
And I don't know who caught them, but I seen one older gentleman said he was in a wheelchair sitting there, I know he had to have that 7 pounder hooked up one day. He messed
Yeah.
with that fish for, I know, 10 or 15 minutes till it finally broke him off. But it was a great time to watch.
Yeah. Well, he's got a story to tell the rest of his life now.
Yep. But and in the state of Missouri, the trout program has brought so much to the table. I mean, the trout program makes money for the state, a lot of money for the state. And with my conversations with MDC, they started the Blue Ribbon uh, trout program, where they're given the coins and the
Right.
certificates and all that for going to these different springs. And everyone's like, oh, I didn't know these springs had trout in them. Well, realistically, there's probably somewhere between 40 and 50 springs throughout the Ozarks that have trout in them. They're
Right.
just not public. They're just not public.
Right.
Um, back when the McLeods were coming on the train east through Missouri, they were selling cans of McLeod fingerlings for 11 cents a piece to whoever wanted to buy them and let them go dump them wherever they felt the need to. And it's just an amazing history that nobody understands. And a lot of people think, oh, trout, they're originally from here. They just
No,
happen to be
they don't.
here. No,
Yeah.
they're not. They're an
Well,
invasive
we're
species.
we are absolutely blessed to have them. And if you think about Lake Taneycomo itself, it's one of the best tailwater fisheries in the world.
Oh
And
yeah.
the blessing that we have to have this in the Midwest is just absolutely incredible. So we do have to, take care of that resource so that others can enjoy it. Just like Grain Creek and all the other smaller creeks that have that in there. What a resource to be able to do that in the Midwest.
I've spoken to people that fly fish all over the world. One Al, shoot, I can't think of his last name, but he's an artist. Everybody
Al
knows him. Al,
Agnew.
yes,
Yeah.
Al Agnew. And he has a place in Wyoming or Montana that he winters at, and summers here in Missouri, or vice versa, either way. But he tells me one day, I asked him, I said, "Where are you going to go if you want to catch a trophy trout?" He said, "If I want to catch a trophy trout, I'm going to fish in Missouri." And I've asked, I don't know, probably 50 people that same question. And everybody I talk to, no matter where they've fished and where they've experienced fishing, they're like, "I can go to Taneycomo. I can go to the Current. I can go to the 11 Point,
Yeah.
and I can catch a trophy class fish, or I can more than likely catch one than if I took paid $5,000 to go to Wyoming or Montana
But
or
absolutely. So
wherever to catch one."
the guide in Alaska. I spent 8 summers guiding up there, retired from that 6 years ago, and worked for a very high end Orvis endorsed fly fishing lodge up there, Crystal Creek Lodge on the Naknek River. And the Naknek River was the go to place to catch the Holy Grail. You're looking for a 30-inch trout up there, and it happened quite often. We're coming close to that on Lake Taneycomo with these rainbow trout. I had a young boy that had only been trout fishing 2 times. No, 1 time. He went out with me for a second time the other night, and he caught a 28-inch rainbow trout that night. Very next cast, he catches a 25-inch rainbow trout. Those are Alaska-sized trout. Those are
Mm-hmm.
almost salmon-sized trout. So what we have is just absolutely incredible in Missouri.
And not only do we have the options for big lake water, we can give an element of, you know, of a mountainous type fishing, a small stream, European type stream.
Right? Yeah.
Um, if you get out there and look, it's there. I mean, there's so many opportunities, and the trout we have, they live in beautiful friggin' places. You know,
Yeah.
you get on the Current, you can get down in these big, huge gullies that have mountains on both sides, and pretty much any kind of animal you can imagine wandering around you. Wild
Yep.
horses,
Bears. Yeah, we got it
yeah.
all.
And we're right here in the middle of the country,
Yeah.
and I love it. Um, within 5 hours of St. Louis, you can catch and release or catch and keep pretty much any species of cold water. Well, not any species. Within the rainbow or brown, smallmouth. I mean, we're a mecca of fly fishing here in the state, and I I wish it was on the map more than what it is. Not that I want more
Yeah.
people on the river, but
That's another thing that we've had since COVID a little bit of dealings with, and it's kind of interesting to look back at that. Before COVID, we had a declining interest in the outdoors, fly fishing, anything outdoors fishing,
mhm,
for over a decade, and it was becoming scary almost of what's going to happen to this. And then COVID kicked off and shut down all the movies and theaters and restaurants and all that concerts, and people had to do something, and a lot of them went to the outdoors. For a while, you couldn't even buy a boat. Even to try and buy a boat was impossible because there was such a demand for them. RVs, campers, things like that. And so we've had this huge, huge push in the outdoors in the last 3 years now that is just absolutely incredible. And for some of us that have been doing it forever, yeah, it's a little aggravating, but what it does is ensures the future of the sport, and it gives you an opportunity to give back to the community. You got to remember that when you first got into it, fly fishing, whatever, somebody took you under their wing and kind of taught you the way, and taught you how to do it. Well, now it's our turn to step up and do that to all these newcomers.
that's for sure. And we can only do that with education.
Absolutely. Not getting frustrated and aggravated because what is you feel is being taken from you, but look what is being given to the future of the sport. And it's our responsibility to ensure that that goes in the right direction.
You know, Many times, well, I can tell you this: opening weekend of trout season at Montauk this year. My wife and I and two daughters. We took our camper down to Montauk, as we do every year. And the guys that were camping next to us had never, I think they told me they'd been going to Montauk for 35 years or something. Two older gentlemen.
Right.
Well, they had never fished below the park at Montauk. And I said, really? And I come up there the next day showing pictures of these pretty good sized browns I'd caught the day before on the fly. And where'd you catch those at? Well, they caught them down below the park. Well, how far did you have to walk? I said, well, less than a mile. Well, how'd you do that?
Right.
And I took those guys down there the next day, and you know, the parks are a great thing. I love them because it gets people doing the sport. It educates them. But the park is typically a put and play, a put and take. That's what it is. They put
Right.
fish in there for you to catch them, to take them home to eat them.
Right.
So by taking these guys below the park, I said, this isn't particularly a put and take like up in the park.
Right. But yeah, if you're going to introduce somebody to that, not just the fishing, you have to introduce them to all the aspects of it, the etiquette of it,
Yes.
the whole deal, to ensure that it goes in the direction it needs to go.
And even with the reading of the water, they didn't really particularly have an understanding of, there's a river there. They're just standing in any particular spot and throwing out like they would be in the park.
Right.
And so I took them and I said, okay, I just want to, no disrespect. I want to try to help you learn how to understand this water to be able to catch fish. And I said, with the current, if you look at it, it's wide in places. I said, you have to look for the channels, the deeper spots where the fish will leapfrog from that wider, shallow water from one deep hole to the next deep hole to get to the next deep hole to where they're setting to get into the cooler water up into the spring.
Right.
Well, that makes sense. And I said, you see that? And I have a spot just right below the park that I have caught more over 5 pound browns out of than I can count. And I said, you see that spot right there? I said, it's only about a foot wide and it's about 10 foot long. I said, you cast in that spot. I said, I can almost guarantee you there's going to be at least one fish laying in there. I don't, that's just too, there's not going to be a fish in there. So you cast in there. Oh boy, cast in there. And he pulled out, I don't know, it was probably 4.5 pound brown. Beautiful yellow belly on it. Just a beautiful brown. He pulled out of it. And he said, wow, that makes sense. He says, maybe we should come down here more often. I said, yeah. There's fish here to be caught. And then we went into the fit, netting the fish and how to keep the fish in the water and handle it. And
yep.
I went away from that experience and I was like, that felt good, being able to help these guys and seeing them catch that big fish that they had never caught before.
Yeah, absolutely. And to realize that, they're going to go back and do it again, which is great, but they're also going to take care of those fish properly so that they continue to grow and we continue to have an experience like that.
And it's amazing. And I'm sure you get that same feeling getting out on the, all the guide trips you have and watching these people catch their personal best or even catching a trout at all, no matter how big or how small they are.
Yeah, I get a lot of first trout, a lot of first time on the fly rod fish, a lot of first big fish, a lot of personal best fish, and it's just a great job to have. You definitely have to have patience and the ability to teach. Not everybody learns the same, and it's kind of my job to figure out, okay, how can I get you to catch a fish? And that's the challenge of it that I love.
And fly fishing really hits home personally for me because, it's been my healing catalyst from PTSD and the military in general. And I've enjoyed being able to share that with other veterans. I know there's a lot of different programs out there that have done a similar thing. Project Healing Waters and
right.
Like What's the other one? There's one around Fort Leonard Wood and a couple others that, that's what they do solely. But
Right.
for me,
The Wounded Warriors, the Project Healing Waters. There's quite a few different ones out there. Of course, I'm a combat veteran, also 82nd Airborne, first unit deployed to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and
mhm,
I also had a lot of demons. We'll call it demons, and Lake Taneycomo definitely helped calm those and put those to rest. And I definitely try to share that with any veteran that I get out there on the water, especially if I see them that in us being through, we can recognize the signs of struggles and tribulations, and I try to introduce them to that as another tool, an avenue to help be at peace.
that's for sure. I've been in contact with the VA here in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. Of course, I live an hour or so away from them, but they're they're like, hey, you want to you'll spend the time to come down here and tie some flies with some guys and do this. I would drop everything I'm doing today and come down there and do it. I said
Yeah,
it works, and I don't know. I'm just a bit. I'm very big on if I see that it works and I can remove the red tape that is involved with so many things that's involved with the government or the VA or any of that, and just make it happen without having to deal with anything else involved in it. I do my best to do that.
absolutely.
And
As stress free as possible, because that's what it's supposed to be about. It's supposed to be removing that from you.
yep, that's for sure. So, weren't you involved in catching one of those state record fish?
Well, not really involved so much. Good stories. We'll call it good
Yeah.
stories. Um, Frank the Tank was the first state record caught. Was about 3.5 years ago by Paul Cruz. I actually had spotted Frank the Tank several years before that, 3 years before that. Got pictures and video of him up and down the lake. He used to hang out at Lily's Landing dock, underneath their dock quite a bit. And I'm the one that actually named him Frank the Tank. And a good friend of mine, Paul
Hmm.
Cruz, actually caught that fish during a February fishing tournament, the Vince Elfrink Memorial Tournament. And my brother and sister were actually out fishing that tournament and got video of Paul landing the fish. Called me up, said, "Hey, somebody caught Frank." And I was like, "Well, who was it?" And they're like, "Paul Cruz." And I couldn't think of a better person to catch that fish during the Vince Elfrink Memorial Tournament, because Vince Elfrink was a very good friend of Paul Cruz's also. So kind of
That's
for that to happen. And Frank the Tank came in at just over 36 pounds. And then 6 months later, another good friend of mine, Bill Babler, caught the 40-pound state record. Frank the Tank was successfully released up the hatchery. I was part of that release, a successful release. And he showed up 3 weeks later back down at Lily's Landing dock and hung around for about another year, kind of on and off. And then eventually, I figure, expired from old age. He was probably 10 or 11 by the time he expired. And they just don't live much longer than that. The 40 pounder, I was part of the unsuccessful release on that fish, trying to release that fish. We had it in the fish tank with extra oxygen pumping in on it, and he was sitting upright for about an hour, and we thought we had it. And then it was just like flipping a light switch. That fish lost all its color and went belly up when it expired within a 5-minute window. We had the fisheries biologist Shane Bush with us there, trying to help us out with the handling of that fish, also recommendations on what was best for the fish. But he's like, he was just an old fish and had a heart attack. So there was nothing that really could have been done about that fish. When Bill Babler caught that fish, it only took about 5 minutes to get it in, and he was fighting it on 4-pound test. So that alone
wow.
tells you that fish was at the end of its life cycle, and just one of those things that was meant to happen. Bill caught that fish and landed that fish because it was meant to happen. And Bill, another outstanding guide on Lake Taneycomo with years and years of experience. He's almost fully retired right now, still doing a little bit of guiding. Yeah, I got the dog going here. He wants to tell part of the story too. And so that couldn't have happened to a better person either. A lot of people were upset that that fish did not survive, but I don't think anybody else out there has much experience in the handling and successful releasing of over 30-pound trout. The team that we had on that trout had one successful release of a 36-pounder. So probably had the most experienced people out there on the job trying to get it done. It just wasn't meant to happen.
You know, didn't I hear a rumor they found a dead one floating that was probably bigger than that fish?
Phil Lilly found a floating fish back in 95 or 96, I believe it was, that with the measurements on that, that fish could have gone up to 44 pounds. And there
Mm-hmm.
is of that fish also mounted at Lily's Landing Resort Marina, along with Frank the Tank and Bill Babler's 40-pounder. So you can walk in there and actually get to see the size, the massiveness of these fish. If you've ever been fishing up in Alaska and fished for king salmon, that's what they look like. I mean, they are the size of king salmon, just absolutely incredible. The 44-pounder that was found floating dead, which would have been a new world record at the time, um, they actually used a king salmon replica to that do a
Wow,
replica fish. Yeah.
that's crazy. So on Taneycomo today, if I wanted to catch a double-digit fish, where would you take me? Well, no, I'm not going to ask you where you would take me. Um, would we go up on the lake or would we go down on the lake?
We'd stay in the trophy area right now. I've been seeing them over the last 2 weeks. I've seen 4 of them that I think will go double digits for sure. 15 to 20-pound range. I've got 4 of them that I've been seeing pretty regular. There's several of them in the 10 to 12-pound range, kind of up in that area right now. The other thing
Mm-hmm.
that's happening right now is everybody likes to come down in October for the brown run. Um,
Mm-hmm.
those browns are actually starting to make their move right now, coming up out of the lake and starting to venture in. And that's when I'm really successful at catching those bigger browns, is while they're on the move up into the areas to start thinking about spawning, because they're still on the feed bag then.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, once they get up there and spawn, that's 99.9% of what's on their mind is just spawning. So you can still catch them up there. That's when people like to go up there and fly fish for them in the shallower water while they're on the reds and doing that kind of stuff. But if you want to catch an aggressive one, now through the middle of September is about the time to start looking at making that happen. Um, Boat fishing, you're missing out on a lot of different opportunities if you're just wade fishing. You're very restricted with the flows that we have now. And the boat fishing, especially with a fly rod throwing a streamer, if you'll get out in those heavier currents with some sinking leaders and just really smoke that streamer off the bank, you could be very successful. When I say smoke a streamer, I'm talking probably 10 times more aggressive than you've ever dreamed of dragging one through the water.
It's something that you say that, and when I was really learning about streamer fishing, I watched a lot of videos, and I seen a gentleman take a streamer and he threw it, and they were saltwater fishing, and they threw the streamer out, and he took the fly rod and stuck it underneath his arm and
Yes.
was double hand pulling this streamer like this.
Right.
And if he didn't do that, he wasn't catching fish. If he
Right.
did do that, they were freaking slamming it.
Right. So during the daytime, these bigger fish are primarily nocturnal predators. So you have to trigger a predatory reaction strike of I need to eat that now or it's getting away. If it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't look like it's trying to get away from something, they're not interested. They got too much time to look at it. So you've got to have that thing moving as fast and erratic as possible. When I'm doing the jerk baits, I try to explain it to people. You're trying to get that lure to do the walking the dog action under the water, as
Mhm.
crazy, erratic as possible. And when they're on them jerk baits, if they're not worn out in an hour, they're not doing it right. And it's got to be the same way with a streamer to trigger that strike.
It's the first time I went down there at Taneycomo was that tournament with Clayton and I, and we had our first conversation that day. I found that next morning is I could get that streamer out there, and I was stripping. I wasn't stripping near fast enough, but I seen the fish would turn around, they would follow it, and then all of a
Yeah,
sudden they just quit.
you were
It's
almost there.
just
You
I was almost there, but I wasn't quite
almost,
there.
but you were not triggering that. You had their interest, but then they
Mm-hmm.
followed it enough, and they're like, "That's not trying to get away. That's not real."
Yep.
And the biggest mistake I would see people make is we'd get these big browns coming out, or big rainbows even coming out, and chasing these streamers or jerk baits, and they'd stop or slow down to let the fish catch up to it. That would kill the.
Mm-hmm.
It kills it instantly. You're done. It's over. If you get that thing moving faster, like it's really trying to get away, that'll trigger that strike. If that fish wants it, if you trigger that, there's nothing you can do to stop him from hitting it. I've lifted that lure fly a foot out of the water, and they've chased it all the way to the boat and come a foot out of the water and grabbed a hold of it, and I've landed on be 8, 9, 10 pound browns.
That's crazy. And
Yeah.
it's funny that you know you go from Euro nipping, which is slow and very direct, to the other end of the spectrum with streamers that are crazy and just the most mass organization or disorganization you can think of, and both of them work. It's just
Right.
what you are comfortable with. And
Right.
for me,
The more
for me
tools,
that
the better off you're going to be. And
mhm,
I do. Not everybody has the same skill set, so I have to find the tool that fits people's hand. And
yep.
sometimes it's that Euro nymphing style. Sometimes it's the stringer on the fly rod. Sometimes it's jerk bait. Sometimes it's midges under a float. But you got to
Yep.
have it all available.
And it and it's funny, every one of them work saltwater, freshwater, shallow
Oh,
water, deep water. I mean, it'll all work everywhere. You just got to find out what your niche is at that moment in time.
right, exactly. And all of them stand a chance of catching a big fish. All of them do. You didn't
Hmm.
know when or where that big fish is going to come from. I try to tell people that all the time. Look, we could catch a 20-inch fish on this size 18 midge. It could have.
Hmm.
You have to be ready for it.
And it's funny when I really first started. I do a lot of they call it a hopper dropper, but I fish with a crackleback and either a rainbow warrior or a Nick's fat caddis underneath
Yep.
them.
Hmm.
And when I first started fishing, those little bitty tiny, size 18, 14 and 18, I think are the sizes of those rainbow warriors and Nick's fat caddis that I use. And I caught it was a 5 pound brown, I think 5 or 6 pounds brown on that little bitty tiny size
Right.
18 hook.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm catching these giant fish on this tiny hook. But then, 2 hours later, I'm pitching a streamer and I'm catching the same fish on that
Right.
size 2 hook on
But
that streamer.
some of the brown trout records we've had over time, one of the most memorable was by a good friend of mine, Rick Osborne. And unfortunately, Rick passed away this year. But he was one of the most influential fly fishermen down there and part of the original Dark Army night crew. And
Yeah.
Rick taught me a lot about fly fishing, sight fishing, stuff like that. But he had the state record at the time. I think it was 4 or 5 brown trout ago. It was 27 pounds, 10 ounces caught on the fly rod on a size 10 scud.
That's
You know,
awesome.
yeah, which is absolutely incredible. That record, really cool record because it was caught on a fly rod. The following 6 months later, Scott Sandusky caught the 29-pounder on power bait, which it's a great fish, but power
Yeah.
bait tends to take a little bit of some of the out of it. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't lessen what he did. He still had a state record, 29-pound brown trout, which just absolutely incredible. And then following that was Paul Cruz's fish, and then Bill Babler's 40-pounder. So yeah, then 4 state records ago was Rick Osborne's caught on the fly rod on a size 10 scud.
So in Taneycomo, are there a lot of big smallmouth in there? Yeah.
My best smallmouth was 21 inches long and 5.5 pounds. Came out of Lake Taneycomo.
Nice.
I don't know if there's a lot of them in there, but there's opportunity for them in there, especially when they open the floodgates on Table Rock Lake. A lot of them warm water will come over the top of that dam and survive that fall. That's typically when we start catching a lot of the smallmouth, the walleye and white bass and things like that. But a well-known secret, Lower Lake Taneycomo has a very good bass population. They're actually starting to hold a few of the smaller tournaments down there, and some of the bass guys are getting out there and chasing them. I used to duck hunt the lower lake quite a bit 15, 16 years ago, and I was down in an area we called the gold mine, set up in a slough across from that bluff, and there was a guy coming up there. It's right when the Alabama rig first came out, so it might only have been 8 or 10 years ago, but this guy was working his way up the bank throwing an Alabama rig, and every other cast he had a 4 or 5 pound bass on. And I had ducks landing in the decoys and stuff, but I was enjoying watching him. And I thought, if I shoot, I'm just going to scare the crap out of him. So I'm letting ducks land in the decoys, and this guy's just crushing bass up that whole bluff. So it is pretty good bass fishery down there. A lot of guys now, or a few of the guys I know, are talking about throwing frogs on the grass mats down there by Forsyth and stuff like that. But Shane Bush, the fisheries biologist for Lake Taneycomo, has done a couple of different shockings and surveys down there, and sent me some pictures of some 7 to 9 pounders that he's pulled up down there.
Whew. It's a good fish.
Yeah.
I've gotten to the point now in my life, I fly fish for pretty much everything.
Right.
My current task is alligator gar, and in Southeast Missouri, they had started stocking alligator gar. Missouri Conservation did, and I'll just say the Cape Girardeau area. That's the extent of where I'm going to say they're at. But they are now.
I'm not going to say it either.
now they are in the anywhere from 70 to 120 pound range.
Oh wow!
They've got some big ones down there. So my next task is I've got to get a fly rod big enough for one thing.
Throw a chicken fly.
Yeah. throw a full chicken out at them, and hopefully I can get one. They don't have a state record for alligator gar in Missouri.
I thought somebody bow killed one, so that would be an alternate record for the state.
I think that might have been recently, because the last time I checked, they didn't have one up on the site.
Yeah.
But he told me, he said, "I'll tell you exactly where they're at." The biologist did. He said, "But good luck."
Yep.
So we're going to take the jet boat down there. We're going to try our best to get one. It's crazy to think that you could catch something that big on a trout, but I know guys that catch tarpon that are 6 foot long that are in over 100 pound range. So I am definitely gonna do my best to get on one.
I've gone out there to the Arkansas River out in front of Tulsa in late February, March, stripping big Clouser minnows and hooked into spoonbill on the fly rod and landed 75-pound spoonbill on the fly rod out there. So, it's a possibility to get a big fish on fly rod.
Oh yeah, and it's funny because we catch the long nose gar. They don't get crazy big like those do, but they're a hoot to catch on the fly, and so are carp and just about anything else that'll eat. Because flies are typically everything that's in the water that everything feeds on. So something's going to eat it.
When I lived up in St. Charles County, I used to go to this pond and fly fish for the bluegill all the time. But they
Mhm.
had carp in there, so anytime they'd mow the grass around the pond, I had some green deer hair flies. They were just a ball of deer hair and throw out there and catch the grass carp on the fly rod.
Oh, that'd be a good time.
Yeah.
Them grassies get big.
Yeah, 30, 40 pound range I was catching them.
Well, Duane, I appreciate you coming on the show today. And before we go, let everybody know how they could get a hold of you there on the lake and get a hold of you to go for you to guide them on the lake.
Yeah,
Feel free.
Ozark Trout Runners. I'm Duane Doty with Ozark Trout Runners. And best way to get a hold of me is through my Facebook page, Ozark Trout Runners on Facebook. I have daily fishing reports and pictures and stuff of the stuff we did the day before, so you can kind of get an idea of what's going on. But just get a hold of me through there. Appreciate it.
All right, just hold on one second and we'll close her out. Before we go, I would like to thank Cardiac Mountain Outfitters, Woolly Bugger Fly Company, LOZ Lures, Dooley's Fly Fishing, Lazy River Road Outfitters, Grumpy Platypus Hackle, and Andronimus Fly Company. And remember, Dooley's, the second week of August will be their grand opening there in Mountain Home, Arkansas for their new fly shop. Give Nick a holler. He's got a lot of great stuff down there. And I hope you all have a wonderful week, and we will talk soon.